Hey there, this is the second of our lectures for today. We're going to be talking specifically about what photosynthetic organisms you need to be looking at for the basis of your food web. So when we talk about photosynthetic marine organisms, we're talking about these different characteristics. We have Anthophyta, which are seed-bearing, or different categories, not characteristics, sorry. We have Anthophyta, which are seed-bearing plants. We have macroscopic and microscopic algae, and then photosynthetic bacteria. So we're going to kind of talk about what some of the important organisms are in each of these. So Anthophyta only live in shallow coastal waters. They're primarily your grasses and mangroves and seaweeds. And so if your creature is a near shore creature, this will likely serve as a good firm foundation of their food web. And so you'll need to look specifically at what types of seagrasses and that kind of thing does your creature eat, and you would include that at the base of their food web. We also have macroscopic algae, which are categorized as the seaweeds. So all of your seaweeds fall under this category, and they're broken down into, they're actually algae, but they look like plants a lot of the time. And they were broken down into green algae, red algae, and brown algae. And so green algae you have common in freshwater. And so these algae will not be part of our food web likely unless your creature is lives in brackish waters of like estuaries and such. And then you have your red algae. These are the most abundant and most widespread. And even though they're called red algae, they're not all red. And these are very rare in freshwater. So these are the ones that you're going to find in your saltwater environments. And so again, don't be confused by the fact that it says red. They're not always red. Brown algae are what you find in your middle latitudes and in your colder waters. So starting at about 30 degrees north and south and up, you get your brown algae. This is sargassum. This is found in the Sargasso Sea, which we've talked about a lot. This is actually how the Sargasso Sea got its name, and just because of the abundance of it. And then you have another type of brown algae here. Kelp is a huge, obviously in size, but also a huge piece of this category as well. This actually is usually found in kelp beds along with a symbiotic organism within kelp beds. And so we have areas where algae is prolific, for better or for worse. And there were actually people that were hired before the 2008 Olympics in Beijing to help clean up the harbors and coves and different areas that were going to be very visible having the Olympics there. And so they were cleaning up all the algae in that area. And then our next category is our microscopic algae. These are mostly planktonic, and these guys are what basically create the base of 99% of the food webs for marine animals. The only marine animals that would not include this in their food web are the ones that are purely scavengers. And so they are just super important to the whole entire ecosystem in the ocean in terms of the food ecosystem and what the makeup of that is. So again, they're mostly planktonic, and they fall under a category called golden algae. And you have diatoms and coccolithophores, and so also called coccoliths. And diatoms are made up of shells, which are called tests, made of silica, which is the most abundant mineral that's found in the soil. And so if you've ever heard or done any gardening or anything with moving dirt or anything or understanding what type of soils are available, you've probably heard the term diatomaceous earth. And that means that it has a high concentration of decomposed diatoms. Their shells will remain, and if you have a high accumulation of diatoms in the area from previously being covered with water at some point, then you have a patch of what's called diatomaceous earth. And then your coccolithophores have plates instead of shells, and they are made of calcium carbonate. Here's what they look like. You have a diatom. You can see that it has two pieces. That's where they get their name. All of the diatoms, this is just one example, all of the diatoms have like two pieces to their body, if you will. And then here's a coccolith, and you can see each and every little shell. Each individual is a coccolith. The whole thing together is a coccolithophore. Then we have our dinoflagellates. These are microscopic algae, and these guys are the ones that are not good. They carry toxins, they cause red tide, and they possess flagella for locomotion. So they are actually able to move themselves, even though they're still considered plankton, they can move themselves within the current. And that's where they get their name, flagellate, because of the flagella. So they have cellulose tests. So remember, test means shell, but cellulose is the same material that wood is made out of. So they're more like plant fibers than the other ones are. Here are some pictures of dinoflagellates. You can see that on the bottom here, these little pointy deals, those are their flagella. That's kind of what they wiggle around to be able to move. Here's another picture here. Okay. And those red tides are really harmful. So they are natural. They happen. And these are becoming more frequent in the Gulf, especially because of the runoff of nutrients. And unfortunately, it causes all algae to overbloom, including algae that's harmful. So what happens is these produce toxins that harm fish, that then humans eat those fish, can get poisoned as well. So they're most common April through September, and they're most dangerous in the northern hemisphere, just with the different movement and dynamics that we have in the northern hemisphere. Dinoflagellates specifically are associated with a type of seafood poisoning called ciguatera, and that causes most of your human cases of seafood food poisoning. So here are your, here's your kind of a bit of a web. And so as those toxins get released from the dinoflagellates, they get absorbed into having been eaten by the zooplankton, and then the fish, and then the humans, and mammals, and seabirds all eat that fish and consume, and then you have your, sickness that's going on in your larger creatures that are consuming those fish. You also have those fish that are laying eggs at this time and that are fed on by different microbes. And so you kind of get a double whammy in that area because the fish are consuming the toxins, but then they're also absorbing those directly from the water. So their larvae are absorbing the toxins directly from the water, and then your microbes are absorbing them directly from the water as well. That goes down into your clams and scallops and your shellfish, and then your crabs and shrimp and all of that, which also are eaten by humans and seabirds. And so you can see there's lots of different ways to interact with this harmful bacteria or harmful algae. So we've talked about this before, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but we know that eutrophication is a huge issue in the different dead zones. And so we have eutrophication that happens on its own, We'll get a big washout from whatever reason, whether there's a storm or something like that. But then we also have cultural eutrophication, which is speeding up that activity through human activities. And so when we have fertilizers that are washing into rivers and things like that, obviously that's causing a speeding up or an amplifying of this effects, causing our dead zones. And what happens in a dead zone is it basically suffocates your bottom dwellers. And so here you have river water and salt water meeting, and then that algae bloom happens and everybody's trapped down here. And so your bigger fish, they can get away, but your smaller fish cannot, and so they die. And then your water becomes anoxic completely and kills everything. Your dead zones are really, really prolific around the East Coast and Gulf Coast of the US. We do have some off the West Coast, but there are different kind of mechanisms in place where it doesn't make it as bad over here. And you can see over off the coast of Europe as well. In Scandinavia, we have a huge dead zone off the coast of China and Japan over here. But that's a major issue in terms of feeding the ocean. And this is where it all comes from in the Gulf. Again, we read about this, so I'm not really going to go into it too deep, but we also have photosynthetic bacteria. This is another possibility for a base of a food web, a photosynthetic base of a food web, and they are most abundant. They're the most abundant and smallest marine phytoplankton, these little guys here. And they are responsible for at least half of the world's photosynthetic biomass. So we kind of need to get out of our head that bacteria is bad, because in this case, that bacteria is really good and serves as a large part of the basis of everybody's food web. So as you're looking at your creatures, you're going to want to be paying attention to what type of photosynthetic creatures are at the basis of their food webs. And so you need to be specific. You can't just say phytoplankton. You have to talk about what type of phytoplankton is at the basis of their food web. So as you do this, you're going to want to start with your creature. And then what does your creature eat? So your creature is going to be at the top of your food web. And then what does your creature eat? That's going to form the next level down. And then what do those creatures eat? And then eventually you're going to get all the way down to zooplankton and phytoplankton. And that's where you're going to need to get specific about what types of zooplankton and phytoplankton. As always, if you have any questions, please hop on office hours and we can work through that. Hope you guys have a good day.